Imagine waking up tomorrow and every city has vanished. No streets, no buildings, no grocery stores, just you and endless wild forests. This was the world your ancestors knew for thousands of years. They had no idea they were about to stumble upon secrets that would change everything. Tonight, let me tell you the most incredible story ever told. How we built civilization from nothing. Here's what was at stake. Your ancestors were living on the edge of extinction. Small tribes scattered across empty continents. Most days they barely found enough food. Winter meant watching people starve. Every sunrise was a victory just to see another day. But then something amazing happened. They discovered things that seemed impossible. Ways to make food grow from dirt. Ways to tame wild beasts. Ways to build shelters that lasted forever. These discoveries could save humanity. Or they could destroy everything they knew about survival. Your ancestors had to choose. Keep wandering and stay safe. Or risk everything for a dream they couldn't even imagine. This choice created the world you live in today. Let me take you back 20,000 years. The world looks nothing like today. Massive ice sheets cover most of North America. Europe is a frozen wasteland. Sea levels are 400 feet lower than now. You could walk from England to France on dry land. Your ancestors are living in this Ice Age world. They're not primitive cavemen like movies show you. They're incredibly smart. They have to be. One mistake means death. Picture a small group of maybe 30 people. They're your family, your entire world. Everyone knows everyone. The old woman with grey hair remembers when the mammoth herds were bigger. The teenage boy can track a wounded deer for days. The mother nursing her baby can identify which berries are safe from 50 different plants. These people carry everything they own. Spears with stone tips. Hide clothing sewn with bone needles. Fire-making tools that took hours to craft. They can't afford to lose anything. There's no store to buy replacements. Winter is their greatest enemy. Food becomes impossible to find. Animals migrate south or hibernate. Plants die. Rivers freeze solid. Your ancestors huddle in caves or temporary shelters made from mammoth bones and animal skins. They tell stories to pass the long dark nights. They share their last scraps of meat. Sometimes people don't make it till spring. But here's what's amazing. They're creating art. Deep in caves across Europe, they're painting incredible pictures. Horses galloping across stone walls. Bison so realistic they seem to move in flickering firelight. Human hands outlined in red and black pigment. These aren't random scratches, they're masterpieces. Why are they making art when survival is so hard? Because humans need more than food and shelter. They need meaning, beauty, connection to something bigger than themselves. Even 20,000 years ago, your ancestors understood this. They're also incredibly skilled hunters. They work together to bring down woolly mammoths weighing 6 tons. Imagine coordinating 20 people with primitive weapons to kill something that massive. They dig pit traps. They use fire to drive herds toward cliffs. They waste nothing from these kills. A single mammoth feeds the entire group for weeks. The meat gets dried and stored. The fat becomes fuel for lamps. The bones become tools and weapons. The hide becomes clothing and shelter. The tusks become spear points and jewelry. Nothing gets thrown away because nothing can be replaced easily. Women gather plants, roots, nuts, and berries. This isn't simple work. They need to know hundreds of different species, which ones are ready when, which parts are edible, how to prepare them safely. Some plants are poisonous unless cooked exactly right. Others cure diseases. This knowledge takes decades to master. Children start learning survival skills before they can walk properly. By age 5, they know animal tracks. By 10, they can make fire and find water. By 15, they're contributing adult-level work. There's no choice. Everyone must be capable or the group dies. Death surrounds them constantly. Infections that today's antibiotics cure easily become death sentences. Broken bones that modern doctors fix in hours can mean permanent disability. Childbirth kills many mothers and babies. The average person lives maybe 35 years if they're lucky, yet they're not living in despair. They laugh. They play games. They make music with bone flutes and drums. They dance around fires. They fall in love and form families. They have ceremonies when children are born and when elders die. They're fully human in every way that matters. Their tools are simple but incredibly effective. Stone knives sharper than modern steel scalpels. Spears that can pierce mammoth hide. Needles fine enough to sew waterproof clothing. They know exactly which rocks make the best cutting edges, how to heat-treat wood to make it stronger, how to tan hides so they stay flexible in freezing weather. They live in harmony with nature because they have no choice. Overhunt one area and they starve. Pollute a water source and they die. Take more than the environment can give and everything collapses. They understand limits in ways we've forgotten. These people are your direct ancestors. Their DNA flows in your veins. Their survival instincts are built into your brain. Their creativity runs through your thoughts. Everything you are traces back to their struggles and triumphs in that frozen world. They have no idea they are about to witness the biggest change in Earth's climate since humans existed. The ice age that shaped their entire way of life is about to end, and with it, everything they know about survival will change forever. The change starts slowly. Maybe one summer the ice melts a little more than usual. The next year spring comes a few days earlier. Your ancestors notice, but don't worry. Climate has always varied year to year, but this is different. This is the end of the last ice age, happening around 11,700 years ago. The massive ice sheets that covered half the world start collapsing. Sea levels rise 400 feet. Entire landscapes disappear underwater. Others emerge from melting ice for the first time in 100,000 years. Your ancestors watch their world transform. Glaciers that seemed permanent retreat hundreds of miles. Rivers change course. Forests spread into areas that were frozen wasteland. Deserts bloom into grasslands. The map of Earth is being redrawn. At first this seems wonderful. Warmer weather means longer growing seasons. Plants produce more food. Rivers run year-round instead of freezing. Hunting becomes easier because animals don't need to migrate as far. But then disaster strikes. The megafauna start dying. Imagine watching the last mammoth die. These giants survived multiple ice ages. They seemed indestructible, but they can't adapt to the rapidly changing climate. The plants they eat disappear. The cold they need for survival vanishes. Within a few thousand years, mammoths go extinct everywhere except a few tiny islands. It's not just mammoths. Giant ground sloths bigger than cars vanish from the Americas. Saber-toothed cats lose their prey and starve. Cave bears disappear from Europe. Massive elk with antlers 12 feet wide go extinct. The giant animals that your ancestors built their entire lifestyle around are gone forever. This forces your ancestors to completely change how they live. No more mammoth hunts that fed entire tribes for months. No more predictable migrations to follow. They have to learn to hunt smaller, faster animals. Deer instead of mammoths. Rabbits instead of giant ground sloths. Fish instead of massive ice age predators. But here's where human adaptability shines. Your ancestors don't just survive this change. They figure out how to thrive in it. The warmer climate creates new opportunities everywhere. Nuts and seeds become more abundant. Rivers teem with fish during spawning seasons. Wild grains start growing in vast fields across the Middle East. For the first time, your ancestors find places where food is so plentiful they don't need to keep moving constantly. Some groups start staying in the same place for months at a time. They build more permanent shelters. They develop new tools for the changing environment. Fishing nets and hooks. Better bows for hunting smaller game. Grinding stones for processing the new plant foods they're discovering. Population starts growing for the first time in human history. When people had to constantly move and could only eat what they carried, families stayed small. Too many children meant not enough food for anyone. But now, with more reliable food sources, couples can afford to have more children. Groups grow from 30 people to 50, then 100, then even larger. This population growth changes everything. Larger groups can tackle bigger projects, they can defend better territories, They can specialize more because there are enough people to handle all the different jobs needed for survival. Trade networks start expanding. When your group has 30 people, you make everything yourself. But with 100 people, maybe one person becomes really good at making stone tools. Another excels at preparing hides. Someone else masters fire making. Now they can trade with each other and with neighboring groups. The end of the Ice Age also opens up new territories. Lands that were covered by ice for thousands of years are now habitable. Your ancestors spread into these new areas, finding resources nobody has ever used before. They're like explorers discovering new continents, except these continents just emerge from melting glaciers. Different groups start developing different specialties based on their new environments. Coastal people become expert fishermen and develop the first boats. Mountain people master hunting techniques for steep terrain. River valley people learn to predict flood seasons and take advantage of fertile silt deposits. But the most important change is psychological. For 200,000 years, humans were entirely focused on immediate survival. Find food today. Stay warm tonight. Avoid predators right now. The Ice Age mentality was always about the present moment, because the future was too uncertain to plan for. Now, with more stable food sources and permanent settlements, your ancestors start thinking ahead. They notice patterns in plant growth. They observe animal behavior across full seasons. They begin to understand that actions today can create benefits tomorrow. This shift from immediate survival to long-term planning is revolutionary. It's the mental foundation that will make civilization possible. Your ancestors are developing the ability to delay gratification, to invest effort now for future rewards, to think beyond their own lifetimes. The stage is being set for humanity's greatest leap forward. The climate has stabilized. Food is becoming more predictable. Populations are growing. People are staying in one place longer. New tools and techniques are spreading through trade networks. Your ancestors have no idea they're about to make discoveries that will change everything about human existence. They're still living as hunter-gatherers, just like their parents and grandparents for thousands of generations. But the foundation is being laid for something completely unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. Something incredible happened to human brains around 70,000 years ago. Scientists call it the cognitive revolution. It's when your ancestors developed the ability to think in ways no animal had ever thought before. Before this revolution, early humans were smart but limited. They could make tools and hunt cooperatively, just like some other animals do today. But then everything changed. Suddenly they could imagine things that didn't exist. They could believe in shared stories. They could cooperate with strangers. They became us. By the end of the Ice Age, your ancestors have had 60,000 years to develop these new mental abilities. The results are staggering. Language has evolved far beyond simple warnings and commands. Your ancestors can now describe complex plans. They can tell stories about events that happened years ago. They can discuss abstract concepts like fairness, courage, and wisdom. They can teach skills through detailed verbal instructions instead of just demonstration. This advanced language transforms how knowledge spreads. Before, if the best hunter in a group died, his skills died with him. Now he can pass on detailed instructions to multiple students. Knowledge accumulates instead of disappearing. Each generation builds on what the previous generation learned. Your ancestors are also developing the first trade networks that span continents. Obsidian from volcanic regions travels thousands of miles to become spear points. Seashells from coastal areas turn up in mountain caves as jewelry. Amber from northern forests reaches southern deserts. These aren't random exchanges. They're organized trading systems that connect dozens of different groups. Think about what this means. A hunter-gatherer group in what's now France is somehow connected to groups in Spain, Italy, and Central Europe. They know about resources hundreds of miles away. They understand value and exchange rates. They have regular meeting places and seasonal trading seasons. This is the beginning of economic systems. But the most revolutionary development is religion and shared beliefs. Your ancestors are creating stories that entire regions believe in. These aren't just local myths. They're shared worldviews that allow complete strangers to cooperate. Picture two groups meeting for the first time. Before shared beliefs, they might fight or avoid each other. But now, they can discover they worship the same spirits, follow the same rituals, believe in the same codes of behavior. Suddenly, strangers become allies. Cooperation becomes possible between thousands of people who will never all meet face to face. Your ancestors are building the first monuments that require massive cooperation. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has stone pillars weighing 16 tons, carved with intricate animal sculptures. This is built 11,000 years ago by people who supposedly live in small, simple hunter-gatherer groups. But creating something like this requires hundreds of people working together for decades. How do they organize such massive projects? Through shared beliefs. Everyone involved believes this monument serves a sacred purpose. They're willing to spend years of their lives moving giant stones and carving detailed art because they all share the same spiritual vision. These monuments aren't just impressive construction projects. They're proof that your ancestors can now coordinate large-scale activities. They can plan multi-generational projects. They can convince people to work on something that won't benefit them personally, but serves the greater community. Art is becoming more sophisticated too. Cave paintings are getting more detailed and symbolic. Your ancestors are creating abstract representations, not just realistic pictures. They're developing writing systems using symbols and marks that carry meaning beyond simple pictures. The mental leap from drawing a bison to using abstract symbols to represent ideas is enormous. They're also developing complex social rituals that bind communities together. Coming-of-age ceremonies that mark the transition to adulthood. Seasonal celebrations that everyone participates in. Funeral rites that honor the dead and comfort the living. Marriage customs that create alliances between families. These rituals serve crucial psychological functions. They give people identity beyond just their immediate family. They create emotional bonds with larger groups. They provide meaning and purpose that goes beyond daily survival. Your ancestors are becoming truly social beings in ways that were impossible before the cognitive revolution. Music and storytelling are evolving into powerful tools for preserving and sharing information. Epic songs that remember important events. Stories that teach moral lessons and survival skills. Rhythmic chants that help people memorize complex information. Before writing exists, these are the libraries that store human knowledge. The elderly are gaining new importance in society. Before advanced language, old people were often burdens who consumed food but couldn't contribute much physical labor. Now they're living repositories of knowledge. They remember rare events, complex skills, and ancestral wisdom. Keeping them alive and healthy becomes a priority because their memories are invaluable. Your ancestors are also developing sophisticated understanding of human psychology. They know how to motivate people, resolve conflicts, and maintain group harmony. Leadership isn't just about being the strongest fighter anymore. It's about being able to convince others, mediate disputes, and make decisions that benefit the whole group. They're creating the first systems of justice and social control, rules about sharing resources, punishing wrongdoers, and resolving disputes. These aren't written laws yet, but they're consistent principles that everyone in the community understands and follows. Social order is becoming more important than individual strength. All of these developments are setting the stage for civilization. Your ancestors now have the mental tools to cooperate in large groups, accumulate knowledge across generations, organize complex projects, and believe in shared goals that transcend individual survival. They can imagine things that don't exist yet and work together to make them real. They can sacrifice immediate benefits for long-term rewards. They can trust strangers who share their beliefs. They can pass on increasingly sophisticated skills and knowledge to their children. The foundation is complete. Climate has stabilized. Food is becoming more abundant and predictable. Populations are growing. Trade networks are spreading. Shared beliefs are enabling large-scale cooperation. The mental tools for civilization are fully developed. Your ancestors have no idea what's coming next. They're still living as mobile hunter-gatherers, just like their ancestors for thousands of generations. But they're about to stumble upon discoveries so profound that everything will change forever. But our ancestors were about to stumble upon a discovery so profound it would change everything. A discovery that most of them initially resisted, fearing it would destroy their way of life forever. The discovery happens by accident. Picture your ancestor walking through the hills of what we now call the Middle East. It's 11,000 years ago. She's looking for wild grains to collect, just like her grandmother taught her. But something catches her eye. In a clearing where her group camped months ago, wild wheat is growing thicker than she's ever seen. The grains are bigger, there are more of them. The stalks stand taller and stronger. She doesn't understand why. She doesn't know that when her group was here before, they accidentally dropped seeds around their campfire. The ash fertilized the soil. The trampled ground gave the seeds perfect conditions to grow. She just knows this grain looks different. Better. She collects as much as she can carry. The taste is richer than normal wild grain. Her family asks where she found it. She takes them back to show them the magical place where grain grows itself. This is happening all across the region we call the Fertile Crescent. It stretches from modern-day Iraq through Syria and down into Israel. The climate here is perfect for wild grains. Wheat, barley and other cereals grow naturally in vast fields. Your ancestors have been collecting these wild grains for thousands of years. They know which ones are ready when. They have special tools for harvesting. Sickles made from flint blades set in wooden handles. Baskets woven tight enough to hold tiny seeds. Grinding stones for turning grain into flour. But they're starting to notice patterns. Areas where they camp regularly produce better grain the next season. Seeds they accidentally spill seem to grow into healthier plants. The biggest, best grains come from places where humans have been living. Some groups start experimenting. What if they deliberately scatter seeds around their campsites before they move on? What if they clear away weeds and competing plants? What if they bring water to help the seeds grow? The results are amazing. The grain they plant produces much more food than what they can gather from wild sources. But there's a catch. They have to stay in one place to tend their experimental plots. They have to protect their growing grain from animals. They have to be there to harvest it at exactly the right time. This creates a huge dilemma. For thousands of generations, your ancestors' survival strategy has been mobility. When food runs out in one area, they move to another. When seasons change, they follow animal migrations. When predators threaten, they disappear into new territory. Now they're facing an impossible choice. Keep moving and stick with the proven survival strategy that worked for their ancestors, or stay in one place and gamble everything on these experimental grain plots. Many groups choose to keep moving. They think these plant experiments are dangerous foolishness. What happens if the grain fails? What if staying in one place makes them easy targets for enemies? What if they lose their ability to survive in the wild? But some groups decide to take the risk. They choose small areas with reliable water sources. They start spending more time each year tending their grain plots. They build more permanent shelters because they're staying longer in each place. The process takes centuries. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become a farmer. It happens gradually. First, they spend a few extra weeks each year tending wild plants, then a month, then entire seasons. Eventually, they're staying year-round. The plants are changing too. Wild grain stalks shatter when they're ripe, scattering seeds everywhere. This is perfect for the plant's survival in nature. But it's terrible for humans trying to harvest. The best grains fall to the ground before people can collect them. But some mutant plants have stalks that don't shatter. In the wild, these plants would die out because their seeds don't spread. But humans love them because they're easy to harvest. Your ancestors start collecting seeds only from these non-shattering plants. They replant only the best ones. Without knowing anything about genetics, your ancestors are conducting the world's first breeding programs. Generation by generation, they're selecting plants with bigger seeds, stronger stalks, and easier harvesting. They're creating the first domesticated crops. The grain is getting bigger and more nutritious. Wild wheat grains are tiny and hard to digest. But after centuries of selective breeding, your ancestors have created wheat with grains 3 times larger and much easier to process into food. The same process is happening with other plants. Wild legumes like peas and lentils are being selected for larger seeds and pods that don't split open. Fruit trees are being chosen for bigger, sweeter fruit. Nut trees are being cultivated for easier cracking and better flavour. Some groups are also starting to experiment with animals. Dogs were domesticated thousands of years earlier, but now your ancestors are trying to tame other species. Wild sheep and goats that hang around human settlements looking for food scraps. Some of these animals are friendlier than others. They're less afraid of humans. They're easier to approach. Your ancestors start feeding these friendly animals regularly. They protect them from predators. They help them find water during dry seasons. In return, they get meat when they need it, milk for nutrition, and wool for clothing. The animals get reliable food and protection. Both species benefit. But this early farming is incredibly hard work. Clearing land means removing every stone, cutting down trees and digging out roots, all by hand with stone tools. Planting means breaking up hard soil with wooden sticks. Harvesting means cutting each stalk individually with small flint sickles. Processing the grain is even more work. It has to be separated from the stalks. The outer husks have to be removed. The grain has to be ground into flour using heavy stone mills. Making bread requires building ovens and maintaining fires. What used to take a few hours of gathering now takes months of labour. Many people in these early farming communities are probably miserable. They're working much harder than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their diet is less varied and probably less nutritious. They're more vulnerable to crop failures and weather disasters. They can't just move away from problems anymore. But they're producing more food per square mile than any humans in history. Their population starts growing faster than ever before. More food means more babies can survive. Permanent settlements mean women don't have to carry small children during long migrations. Families can grow larger. This population growth becomes self-reinforcing. More people means more workers to clear land and tend crops. More workers means more land can be farmed. More farmland means more food. More food means even more population growth. Your ancestors are locked into a path they can't reverse. Even if farming is harder work, they now have too many people to survive by hunting and gathering. There isn't enough wild food in any area to support the large populations their farming has created. They have to keep farming or face starvation. The landscape is starting to change too. Areas that were once wild forests are becoming cleared fields. Rivers are being diverted for irrigation. Wild animal populations are declining as their habitat gets converted to farmland. The relationship between humans and nature is fundamentally shifting. Some groups try to go back to the old ways. When crops fail or enemies attack, they abandon their fields and return to hunting and gathering. But they quickly discover they've lost crucial skills. They don't know how to track animals as well. They can't identify wild plants as easily. They've become dependent on their domesticated crops and animals. The point of no return has been crossed. Your ancestors have become farmers. They've traded the freedom and uncertainty of hunter-gatherer life for the security and hard work of agriculture. They have no idea this decision will lead to cities, writing, governments, and everything we call civilization. They just know they've found a way to make more food than they ever thought possible, and that's going to change everything. Agriculture doesn't stay contained in the Fertile Crescent. It spreads like wildfire across the globe. But here's what's amazing. People in completely different parts of the world are also inventing farming independently. They're coming up with the same revolutionary idea without any contact with each other. In China, your ancestors are experimenting with rice. Wild rice grows naturally in the wetlands along the Yellow River. It's been a food source for thousands of years. But around 9,000 years ago, some groups start noticing the same patterns that Middle Eastern people discovered with wheat. Rice that grows where humans have been living produces better harvests. Seeds that get planted deliberately grow stronger than wild rice. Rice plants that don't lose their seeds to the wind are easier for humans to collect. Chinese farmers develop completely different techniques than Middle Eastern ones. Instead of dry fields, they learn to flood areas to create perfect growing conditions for rice. They build dikes and channels to control water flow. They develop transplanting techniques, starting rice in small plots and then moving the young plants to larger fields. The work is backbreaking. Building irrigation systems means moving tons of mud and stone by hand. Maintaining flooded fields requires constant attention. Transplanting rice means bending over in muddy water for hours every day. But the results are incredible. Rice produces more calories per acre than almost any other crop. Halfway around the world in Mexico, your ancestors are working with an even more unlikely plant. Wild corn looks nothing like modern corn. The kernels are tiny, barely bigger than wheat grains. The ears are smaller than your thumb. The kernels fall off easily, making them almost impossible to harvest efficiently. But Mexican farmers are incredibly persistent. Generation after generation, they select the plants with the biggest kernels and the most kernels per ear. They choose plants where the kernels stay attached to the cob. After thousands of years of breeding, they transform this almost inedible wild grass into corn that can feed civilizations. They're also domesticating beans and squash at the same time. These three crops work together perfectly. Corn stalks provide supports for bean vines to climb. Beans add nitrogen to the soil that corn needs. Squash spreads along the ground, preventing weeds and holding moisture in the soil. Together they provide complete nutrition. Carbohydrates from corn, protein from beans, vitamins from squash. In the Andes Mountains of South America, people are developing potatoes. Wild potatoes are bitter and often poisonous. They require complex processing to make them safe to eat. But Andean farmers learn to breed out the toxins and increase the nutritious parts. They create hundreds of different potato varieties adapted to different elevations and climates. They also domesticate llamas and alpacas. These animals are perfect for mountain environments. They can survive on sparse vegetation and carry heavy loads up steep trails. They provide meat, milk, wool, and transportation. Andean civilization becomes possible because of these hardy mountain animals. In New Guinea, people are independently developing agriculture with bananas and pigs. In the eastern United States, Native Americans are domesticating squash, sunflowers, and eventually corn that spreads north from Mexico. In Africa, people are working with yams, rice, and cattle. Each region develops farming techniques perfectly adapted to local conditions. Desert farmers learn to catch and store rainwater. Mountain farmers create terraced fields on steep slopes. River valley farmers master flood control and irrigation. Coastal farmers combine fishing with crop growing. Animal domestication is happening everywhere too. Middle Eastern farmers tame sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. Asian farmers domesticate chickens, water buffalo, and eventually horses. Americans domesticate llamas, alpacas, and turkeys. Each animal provides different benefits: meat, milk, eggs, wool, transportation, or labor. The process of domestication changes both humans and animals. Dogs become loyal companions instead of wild pack hunters. Sheep grow thicker wool because humans select for it. Cattle become docile enough to work alongside people. Horses allow humans to travel faster and farther than ever before. But domestication also makes animals dependent on humans. Domestic sheep can't survive in the wild because their wool grows too thick. Domestic cattle are too slow and helpless to escape predators. Chickens can barely fly. The animals trade their wild independence for food security and protection, just like humans did. The spread of agriculture happens through multiple pathways. Sometimes farmers migrate to new areas, bringing their crops and animals with them. Sometimes neighboring hunter-gatherer groups see the advantages of farming and adopt the techniques. Sometimes crops and animals spread through trade networks faster than the people who domesticated them. But wherever agriculture appears, the same changes follow. Populations explode. Permanent settlements appear. Social complexity increases. Trade expands. Technology advances. The transformation from mobile hunter-gatherers to settled farmers seems to follow universal patterns. The population growth is staggering. Hunter-gatherer groups rarely exceed 100 people because they can't find enough wild food to support larger numbers. But farming communities quickly grow to thousands of people. Some estimates suggest the global human population increases by 1,000% in just a few thousand years after agriculture begins. This population boom creates pressure for constant expansion. As communities grow beyond what their land can support, some people have to move away and start new settlements. They clear more forest, drain more wetlands, and convert more wild habitat to farmland. The human footprint on Earth is expanding rapidly. Different crops create different types of societies. Rice farming in Asia requires intensive cooperation because irrigation systems need group maintenance. Wheat farming in the Middle East allows more individual family farms. Corn farming in the Americas supports dense populations in permanent villages. Each crop shapes the culture that grows it. Animal domestication has even more dramatic effects. Societies with cattle, horses, and other large domestic animals gain huge advantages. They have more protein in their diets. They can travel farther and faster. They can plough larger fields and harvest bigger crops. They can transport heavy goods over long distances. The differences become crucial when these societies eventually meet. Groups with horses can conquer groups without them. Societies with steel tools and weapons dominate those with stone technology. Populations with domestic animals develop immunity to diseases that devastate groups without animal exposure. But all of this is still thousands of years in the future. Right now, around 8,000 years ago, farming is just spreading and establishing itself in different parts of the world. People are learning to live in permanent settlements for the first time in human history. They're dealing with new challenges and opportunities that their hunter-gatherer ancestors never faced. The revolution is accelerating. What started as small experiments with wild plants is becoming a completely new way of life. Your ancestors are creating the foundation for everything that comes next. Villages, cities, governments, writing, art, science, and technology. They're building the platform that will eventually support billions of people and complex civilizations. But they're also creating new problems that hunter-gatherers never had to solve. How do you govern large groups of people? How do you resolve conflicts when you can't just walk away? How do you store food safely for months or years? How do you prevent diseases from spreading in crowded settlements? The solutions they develop will shape human society forever. Your ancestor walks through her village in the early morning. It's 9,000 years ago, and she's living in something no human has ever experienced before, a permanent home. The village has 500 people living in it year-round. Houses made from mud bricks and stone line narrow streets. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Children play in communal courtyards. Elderly people sit in the shade, making tools and telling stories. This is Jericho, one of the world's first true villages. She's never lived anywhere else. Her parents were born here. Her grandparents helped build some of the original houses. Her children are growing up assuming this is how all people live. The idea of constantly moving from place to place seems crazy to them. But this settled life is creating problems nobody anticipated. When her great-grandparents lived in small mobile groups, everybody was related. Everyone knew everyone else since childhood. Decisions got made by talking until the whole group agreed. There were no strangers and no need for formal rules. Now her village has people she doesn't know personally. New families arrive from other settlements. Children grow up and marry people from different households. There are too many people for everyone to participate in every decision. They need new ways to organize society. The solution emerges gradually. Some people become recognized as leaders, not because they're the strongest warriors, but because they're good at solving problems and mediating disputes. They help decide when to plant crops, how to distribute food during shortages, and how to resolve conflicts between families. These leaders don't have absolute power like kings will later. They're more like respected advisors who help the community make decisions. But it's the beginning of formal government. For the first time in human history, some people have more political influence than others based on their social roles rather than just their personal relationships. The village also needs specialists in ways mobile groups never did. Someone has to be really good at making pottery because everyone needs containers for storing grain. Someone has to master stone tool production because farming requires many different types of implements. Someone has to become expert at building houses because permanent structures are much more complex than temporary shelters. This specialization is revolutionary. In mobile groups, everyone had to know how to do everything because you couldn't rely on others being available when you needed specific skills. Now, your ancestor can focus on becoming really good at one thing because she knows experts in other skills live right nearby. She's become a master at processing grain. She knows exactly how to remove husks efficiently. She's developed techniques for grinding flour to different consistencies for different types of bread. She's figured out optimal fermentation times for different weather conditions. Her bread is better than anyone else's in the village. In exchange, she trades her bread for pottery from the village's best potter, tools from the master flint knapper, cloth from the most skilled weaver. Everyone specializes in what they do best and trades for everything else. The village becomes much more efficient and productive than any mobile group could be, but specialization creates inequality for the first time in human society. The best toolmaker can trade his products for more food than he needs. He accumulates surplus that he can save for lean times or trade for luxury goods. Meanwhile, someone who's not particularly skilled at any trade might struggle to get enough food. This is the birth of wealth differences between people. Hunter-gatherer groups shared everything because nobody could accumulate possessions while constantly moving. But settled villagers can store surplus food, collect valuable tools, and accumulate trade goods. Some families start having noticeably more possessions than others. The village is also dealing with waste and sanitation problems mobile groups never faced. When 20 people live together for a few weeks, their garbage and human waste don't create major health issues. But when 500 people live permanently in a small area, waste becomes a serious problem. They're learning to dig dedicated waste pits away from houses. They're figuring out how to keep human waste separate from drinking water sources. They're discovering that certain areas become unhealthy if too much garbage accumulates. These seem like simple solutions, but they're the beginning of urban planning and public health measures. Disease spreads differently in permanent settlements too. In mobile groups, if someone got sick, the group might move away from the contaminated area. But villagers can't just leave when disease strikes. They have to learn to care for sick people while protecting healthy ones. They're developing the first medical knowledge about treating illnesses that spread in crowded conditions. Storage is becoming incredibly important. Mobile groups ate food immediately because they couldn't carry large stocks of supplies. But farming produces huge harvests that have to last until the next growing season. Villages need secure storage that protects food from rodents, insects, moisture, and theft. They're building the first granaries with thick walls and tight ceiling doors. They're learning to dry grain properly to prevent spoilage. They're developing techniques for storing different types of food safely. Some families are getting much better at food storage than others, giving them security during crop failures. This stored surplus is changing how people think about the future. Hunter-gatherers lived day to day because they couldn't save much for tomorrow. But farmers with full granaries can plan months or years ahead. They can invest labor in projects that won't pay off immediately. They can support people who don't directly produce food. Religion is becoming more organized too. Mobile groups had spiritual beliefs, but they were flexible and personal. Now that people live together permanently, they're developing shared religious practices that bring the whole community together. They're building the first temples and organizing regular ceremonies that everyone participates in. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, another early village, people are creating elaborate religious art. Bulls' heads mounted on walls, goddess figurines, elaborate funeral practices where they bury the dead under house floors. Religion is becoming a way to maintain community bonds and shared identity in these unprecedentedly large social groups. Trade is expanding too. Villages specialize in different products based on local resources. A village near obsidian deposits becomes known for making the best cutting tools. A village with good clay produces superior pottery. A village in a fertile valley grows surplus food to trade. Networks of exchange connect dozens of settlements across hundreds of miles. This trade creates the first professional merchants, people who specialize in moving goods between villages rather than producing anything themselves. They know the routes, understand what different villages need, and can organize transport of heavy or fragile goods. Trade is becoming a specialized skill like pottery or farming, but the most dramatic change is in children's lives. Hunter-gatherer children learned by following adults and gradually taking on more responsibility. They learned everything they needed to know through direct experience. Village children are growing up in a much more complex world with many specialized roles they could potentially fill. Some children show talent for specific crafts and start apprenticing with master craftspeople. Others demonstrate leadership abilities and begin learning about community decision-making. Still others show aptitude for trade or religious roles. For the first time, children are growing up with career choices rather than just learning the universal survival skills all humans needed. This specialization and social complexity is creating something completely new in human history: social classes. Everyone still works hard and contributes to community survival, but some people have roles that give them more influence, wealth, or prestige than others. The egalitarian world of hunter-gatherer bands is disappearing. Your ancestor doesn't realize it, but her village is conducting humanity's first experiment in complex society. They're figuring out how large groups of unrelated people can live together peacefully and productively. They're developing the social technologies that will eventually make cities and civilizations possible. The solutions they create will be refined and expanded over thousands of years, but the basic patterns are being established now. Specialization, trade, storage, leadership, social inequality, organized religion, and permanent settlement. These are the building blocks of every complex society that will ever exist. Yet this agricultural paradise came with a dark secret one that would create the first wars, the first slaves, and the first kings. The very abundance that freed humanity also chained it. Your ancestors' village has grown beyond recognition. What started as 500 people living in mud brick houses has become something much larger and more complex. It's 7,000 years ago, and she's living in one of the world's first towns. Over 2,000 people now live here permanently. The original village sits at the centre, surrounded by newer neighbourhoods that spread in all directions. Houses climb up hillsides. New streets branch off from the old ones. Markets buzz with activity every day. This isn't just a big village anymore. It's something entirely new. The growth happened gradually, but the changes are dramatic. When your ancestor was young, she knew everyone by name. Now she passes strangers on the street daily. New families arrive every season from smaller settlements. Young people from distant villages come looking for opportunities. The community has grown beyond the size where everyone can know everyone else. This creates social problems that villages never faced. In a village of 500, everyone's reputation mattered because bad behavior affected people you'd interact with for the rest of your life. But in a town of 2,000, some people are essentially anonymous. They can cheat, steal, or break community agreements without facing immediate social consequences. The town needs new ways to maintain order and cooperation. Leaders who used to mediate disputes between families they'd known for generations now deal with conflicts between strangers. They need formal rules that apply to everyone, not just informal agreements between people who trust each other. Some families have become noticeably wealthier than others. The master potter who perfected new firing techniques has traded his superior pottery for land, livestock, and stored grain. His family lives in a larger house, eats better food, and wears finer clothing. His children don't need to work in the fields because the family has enough wealth to hire labourers. Meanwhile, families who aren't skilled at any particular craft struggle to compete. They work harder but accumulate less wealth. Their children spend their days doing basic farm labour instead of learning specialised skills. For the first time in human history, the family you're born into significantly affects your opportunities in life. This wealth inequality is creating social classes. At the top are families who control valuable resources or possess highly sought-after skills. Master craftspeople, successful traders, and landowners form an emerging elite. They have more possessions, better homes, and greater influence in community decisions. In the middle are ordinary farmers, basic craftspeople, and labourers who own their own tools and homes. They work hard and meet their families' needs, but don't accumulate significant surplus wealth. They make up the majority of the town's population. At the bottom are people who don't own productive resources and have to work for others to survive. Some are refugees from failed settlements. Others are people whose families lost their land due to crop failures or disasters. They work other people's fields, help in other people's workshops, and live in smaller, simpler houses. Religion is becoming more organized and powerful. The town has dedicated religious specialists who don't spend their time farming or crafting. Instead, they focus entirely on spiritual matters, conducting ceremonies, maintaining shrines, interpreting omens, and preserving religious knowledge. These priests and priestesses are supported by donations from the community. Families give portions of their harvest, crafted goods, and livestock to support religious activities. The religious specialists use these resources to build and maintain temples, organize festivals, and provide spiritual services to the community. The temples are becoming the most impressive buildings in town. While most people live in simple mud brick houses, the temples are built with carefully cut stone, decorated with elaborate carvings, and maintained in perfect condition. They represent the community's shared investment in something beyond individual survival and prosperity. Religious ceremonies are bringing the entire community together in ways that weren't necessary in smaller villages. Monthly festivals where everyone participates, seasonal celebrations that mark planting and harvest times, life cycle ceremonies for births, coming of age, marriages, and deaths. These shared experiences help maintain community identity as the town grows larger and more diverse. But religious authority is also becoming a source of power. The priests and priestesses who interpret divine will can influence major community decisions. They decide when to plant crops based on religious calendars. They determine whether military actions have divine approval. They declare which marriages and business partnerships are spiritually blessed. Trade networks have expanded to span entire continents. Your ancestors' town regularly receives obsidian from Turkey, seashells from the Mediterranean, precious stones from distant mountains, and luxury goods from settlements thousands of miles away. Professional merchants organize these long-distance exchanges. Some families specialize entirely in trade. They don't produce any goods themselves, but make their living by moving products between different regions. They know which settlements need what resources. They understand seasonal patterns of supply and demand. They can organize transport for heavy or fragile items across difficult terrain. These merchant families are becoming wealthy and influential. They have information about distant places that other community members don't possess. They can predict shortages and surpluses before they happen locally. They have connections with leaders in other settlements. Their economic knowledge gives them political influence. The trade networks are also spreading ideas and innovations faster than ever before. New farming techniques developed in one region quickly reach settlements hundreds of miles away. Improved tool designs spread along trade routes. Religious beliefs and artistic styles influence communities that have no direct contact with their places of origin. Your ancestors' town is part of a regional system that includes dozens of settlements of different sizes. Small villages specialize in particular products based on local resources. Larger towns serve as regional centers where goods from multiple villages are collected and redistributed. A few proto-cities are emerging as major hubs that coordinate trade and communication across vast areas. This regional integration creates both opportunities and vulnerabilities. Towns can access resources and products that aren't available locally. They can support larger populations and more specialized occupations. But they also become dependent on trade relationships that can be disrupted by conflicts, disasters, or political changes. Population growth is accelerating beyond what anyone imagined possible. Some regions that supported only a few hundred hunter-gatherers now have tens of thousands of farmers and townspeople. The landscape is being transformed by human activity. Forests are cleared for farmland. Rivers are diverted for irrigation. Hills are terraced for agriculture. This population density creates competition for resources that hunter-gatherer groups never experienced. Different settlements compete for the best farmland, water sources, and trade routes. Tensions arise when one community's expansion threatens another's territory or resources. The conflicts that emerge aren't just personal disputes between individuals. They're organized competitions between entire communities. Towns form alliances with neighboring settlements for mutual protection. They organize raids against competitors who threaten their resources. Warfare is becoming more systematic and involving larger numbers of people. Military leadership is becoming a specialized role like religious or craft specialization. Some people focus on weapons training, tactics, and organizing group defense. They don't spend their time farming or crafting because the community supports them in exchange for military protection. These military leaders gain prestige and influence through successful defense of the community and leadership in conflicts with rivals. They become another source of elite status alongside successful merchants, master craftspeople, and religious specialists. Social mobility still exists but is becoming more limited. A particularly talented individual can still rise from humble origins to elite status through exceptional skill, successful trade, military leadership, or religious calling. But it's becoming harder because elite families can provide better education and opportunities for their children. Elite children learn to read and write if writing systems exist in their region. They're trained in specialized skills from early ages. They inherit valuable tools, resources, and trade connections. They're introduced to influential people in other settlements. These advantages make it easier for them to maintain or increase their family's wealth and status. Meanwhile, children from poorer families spend more time doing basic labor and have fewer opportunities to develop specialized skills. They're less likely to travel, meet influential people, or gain access to advanced education. Social class is starting to be inherited rather than just earned through individual achievement. Women's roles are changing as society becomes more complex. In hunting and gathering groups, both men and women contributed essential resources and had relatively equal status. In early farming villages, women's agricultural knowledge was crucial for community survival, but as society has become more stratified, women's status varies significantly based on their family's social class. Elite women can gain influence through religious roles, craft specialization, or management of family resources. But women from poorer families find their options increasingly limited to basic labor and domestic work. The changes are accelerating. What took thousands of years during the transition from hunting to farming is now happening in centuries or even decades. New technologies, social innovations, and organizational techniques spread rapidly through expanding trade and communication networks. Your ancestors' generation is experiencing more change than any humans before them. They're adapting to social complexity that's unprecedented in human history. They're solving problems that no previous generation ever faced. They're creating institutions and traditions that will influence human society for thousands of years to come. But they're also losing things their ancestors took for granted. The intimate community bonds of small groups, the equality of hunter-gatherer bands, the freedom to leave when social conflicts become unbearable, the certainty that everyone's contributions were essential for group survival. They're trading these for new benefits, security, abundance, specialization, and the excitement of living in a dynamic, growing community. But they're also creating new problems: inequality, conflict, competition, and social complexity that's sometimes difficult to manage. The transformation is far from over. These early towns are just the beginning of humanity's experiment with large-scale social organization. Much larger and more complex societies are coming. Your ancestor watches the craftsman pour glowing liquid metal into a stone mold. It's 6,000 years ago, and she's witnessing something that would have seemed like magic to her grandparents. The craftsman is making tools from copper, the first metal humans have learned to work with. The discovery happened by accident, like most revolutionary breakthroughs. Someone built a fire on rocks that contained copper ore, The heat was intense enough to melt the copper out of the stone. When the fire cooled, they found gleaming metal puddles that could be shaped into tools sharper and more durable than anything made from stone. At first, copper tools were luxury items. Only wealthy families could afford them because the metal was rare and the techniques for working it were closely guarded secrets. But the advantages were so obvious that demand spread rapidly. Copper knives stayed sharp longer. Copper needles were finer and stronger. Copper ornaments didn't break like stone jewellery. The master metalworkers became some of the most valuable specialists in the community. They guarded their knowledge carefully, passing it only to their children or specially chosen apprentices. They could trade their copper tools for almost anything they wanted. They became wealthy and influential members of the emerging elite class. But metalworking required resources and organisation that individual craftspeople couldn't manage alone. Copper ore had to be mined from deep underground. The ore had to be transported from mining areas to workshops. Fires had to be maintained at temperatures much higher than normal cooking fires. Specialised tools and moulds had to be crafted for shaping the molten metal. Mining operations became some of humanity's first large-scale industrial projects. Teams of workers dug shafts deep into mountainsides. They developed techniques for extracting ore from rock, supporting tunnel roofs to prevent cave-ins, and removing water that seeped into mines. Mining required more organisation and cooperation than any previous human activity. The tools revolution didn't stop with copper. Craftspeople learned to combine copper with tin to create bronze, an alloy that was harder and more durable than pure copper. Bronze tools could cut through materials that dulled copper blades. Bronze weapons gave armies decisive advantages over enemies using stone weapons. But bronze required even more complex trade networks because tin deposits were rare and often located far from copper sources. Communities that controlled tin mines or trade routes became wealthy and powerful. Wars began to be fought over access to metal resources. The Bronze Age created new sources of conflict and competition between human groups. Pottery was also becoming incredibly sophisticated. What started as simple containers for storing grain had evolved into a major industry. Master potters created vessels so fine they could hold liquids without leaking. They developed glazes that made pottery waterproof and decorative. They invented kilns that could fire pottery at precisely controlled temperatures. Different regions developed distinctive pottery styles that became trademarkers. People could tell where a pot came from by its shape, decoration, and firing technique. Pottery became one of the first manufactured goods that people desired for aesthetic reasons, not just practical utility. The pottery industry required specialization and organization similar to metalworking. Clay had to be prepared by removing impurities and achieving consistent texture. Fuels had to be gathered for firing kilns. Specialized tools were needed for shaping vessels. Knowledge of firing temperatures and techniques had to be preserved and transmitted to apprentices. Textile production was exploding in complexity too. What began as simple weaving of plant fibers had become an elaborate industry. Different regions developed expertise with different materials: wool from sheep, silk from silkworms, cotton from plants, linen from flax. Master weavers created textiles so fine they became luxury trade goods. They developed techniques for dyeing fabrics in brilliant colours, using pigments from rare plants, minerals, and sea creatures. They invented looms that could produce complex patterns and designs. Clothing became a way to display wealth and social status. The most revolutionary innovation was the wheel. Nobody knows exactly where or when it was invented, but by 5,500 years ago, wheeled vehicles were transforming transportation across Europe and Asia. The first wheels were probably pottery turntables that someone realized could be used for transport. Early wheels were solid wood discs that were heavy and difficult to maneuver, but they allowed people to move loads that would have been impossible to carry. Farmers could transport entire harvests to storage areas. Merchants could move heavy goods over long distances. Armies could supply themselves during extended campaigns. The wheel led to rapid improvements in transportation technology. Roads were built to accommodate wheeled vehicles. Bridges were constructed to allow carts to cross rivers. Harbours were designed for loading and unloading wheeled transport. The wheel changed how humans thought about distance and movement. Boat building was advancing rapidly too. Early boats were simple rafts or dugout canoes that could only be used on calm water near shore. But shipbuilders were learning to construct larger vessels capable of ocean voyages. They developed sails that could harness wind power. They created navigation techniques for travelling beyond sight of land. Sea trade became possible over distances that would have taken months to travel on foot. Mediterranean communities could exchange goods with settlements in distant regions. Island populations that had been isolated for thousands of years suddenly became connected to continental trade networks. These transportation innovations created the first truly international trade routes. Goods could travel thousands of miles through networks of merchants, each handling one segment of the journey. Luxury items from distant regions appeared in local markets. Ideas and technologies spread faster than ever before. But the most important technological development was writing. Different regions invented writing systems independently, but they all served similar functions: keeping records, preserving information, and communicating across distance and time. Early writing wasn't used for literature or personal communication. It was an accounting technology for managing complex economic transactions. Merchants needed to track goods in storage, debts owed by customers, and payments due to suppliers. Temple administrators needed to record offerings, track ceremonial schedules, and manage religious properties. Writing gave huge advantages to communities that developed it. They could preserve technical knowledge instead of relying on human memory. They could coordinate complex projects by recording detailed plans and instructions. They could maintain accurate records of laws, agreements, and historical events. But writing also created new forms of social inequality. Only people who could afford extended education learned to read and write. Literate elites could access preserved knowledge that illiterate people couldn't. Written laws could be interpreted by those who understood the texts, creating power for legal specialists. The pace of technological change was accelerating beyond anything previous generations had experienced. New innovations appeared within single lifetimes rather than across centuries. People had to constantly adapt to new tools, techniques, and possibilities. This rapid change created both opportunities and anxieties. Communities that adopted new technologies quickly could gain advantages over their neighbours. But investments in new equipment and training could become worthless if even newer innovations appeared. People had to balance the benefits of innovation against the costs and risks of constant change. Social structures were adapting to support increasingly complex technologies. Craft guilds emerged to preserve technical knowledge and control access to specialized skills. Apprenticeship systems developed to train new generations of skilled workers. Trade associations formed to coordinate production and marketing of manufactured goods. The relationship between technology and social power was becoming clear. Communities with better tools could produce more goods, support larger populations, and field more effective armies. Technological advantages translated directly into political and economic dominance. But technological superiority wasn't permanent. Innovations spread through trade networks and military conquest. Today's advanced society could become tomorrow's backwater if they failed to continue innovating or lost access to crucial resources. Your ancestors' world was transforming faster than any human society had ever changed before. The tools, techniques, and technologies that made her life possible were mostly invented within her parents' or grandparents' lifetimes. She was living through humanity's first experience with rapid technological progress. The implications went far beyond better tools and techniques. Technology was changing how people thought about human capabilities and limitations. Problems that had seemed unsolvable for thousands of years suddenly had solutions. Distances that had been impassable could now be crossed. Materials that had been unworkable could now be shaped and used. This technological optimism was creating new ambitions and possibilities. If humans could work metal and build wheeled vehicles, what else might be possible? If they could write down information and preserve it permanently, what knowledge might they accumulate? If they could coordinate large-scale projects and transport goods across continents, what kinds of societies might they build? The answers to these questions were about to revolutionize human civilization. Your ancestor stands in the shadow of the largest structure any human has ever built. It's 8,000 years ago, and she's looking up at the massive stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe in what will someday be called Turkey. Each pillar weighs more than 16 tons and stands twice the height of a person. Intricate carvings of animals cover every surface. This isn't a simple village project. Building this required hundreds of people working together for decades. Someone had to organize the labor. Someone had to coordinate the supply of food for all the workers. Someone had to design the complex carvings and oversee their execution. This level of organization is completely new in human history. The leader who organized this project isn't like the informal village headmen your ancestor knew in smaller communities. This is someone with real authority over thousands of people. He can command workers to spend years of their lives moving massive stones. He can demand tribute from dozens of villages to feed the construction crews. He has become the first true chief. This chief doesn't rule through personal relationships like leaders in small villages do. Most of the people he governs are strangers to him. Instead, he rules through a combination of religious authority, military power, and control over resources. He's created the first government that extends beyond face-to-face communities. The religious aspect is crucial. The chief claims to have special connections to the gods and spirits. He interprets divine will for the community. He organizes the massive ceremonies that bring thousands of people together at sites like Göbekli Tepe. People follow his commands because they believe he speaks for supernatural powers. But religious authority alone isn't enough to organize projects this large. The chief also commands warriors who can enforce his decisions. These aren't just village defenders anymore. They're professional soldiers who train for warfare and follow the chief's orders even when those orders conflict with their personal interests or local loyalties. The chief controls the distribution of important resources too. He decides which communities get access to the best farmland. He manages trade relationships with distant regions. He controls the stockpiles of grain and other goods that communities depend on during emergencies. People cooperate with him because he has the power to help or harm their livelihoods. This concentration of power is creating the first true social hierarchies. The chief and his close supporters live differently than ordinary people. They have larger houses, better food, finer clothing, and more possessions. They don't spend their time doing basic labor because others work to support them. Below the chief is a class of specialists who serve his administration. Religious officials who conduct ceremonies and interpret divine messages. Military leaders who command soldiers and organize defenses. Administrators who keep records and coordinate complex projects. Skilled craftspeople who produce luxury goods for the elite. These specialists are supported by tribute from farming communities. Villages are required to provide portions of their harvest to support the chief's projects and administration. They supply workers for construction projects. They provide soldiers for military campaigns. They're no longer entirely independent communities. The majority of people are farmers who work the land and provide the food that supports everyone else. They have less political influence than before, but they are also more secure. The chief's administration protects them from raids, organizes defense against natural disasters, and maintains trade relationships that provide access to goods they can't produce locally. At the bottom of the social hierarchy are people who have lost their independence entirely. Some are captives taken in warfare who work as slaves. Others are people whose families fell into debt and had to work for others to survive. They have little control over their own lives and few rights within the community. Monumental architecture is becoming a way for chiefs to demonstrate their power and organize their societies. Projects like Göbekli Tepe require massive coordination and cooperation. They show that the chief can mobilize thousands of people for shared goals. They create impressive symbols of community identity and achievement. But these monuments serve practical purposes too. They're gathering places where people from scattered villages come together for religious ceremonies, trade fairs, and political meetings. They help integrate large populations into unified societies. They provide focal points for regional identity and loyalty. The labour organisation required for monumental construction is developing new administrative techniques. Supervisors who coordinate work teams, record keepers who track supplies and workers, specialists who design and execute complex decorative programs. These administrative innovations will eventually be used for governing entire societies. Law is becoming more formal and systematic. Chiefs can't rely on traditional customs and personal relationships to govern thousands of people from different communities. They need written rules that apply consistently to everyone. They need courts to hear disputes and enforce decisions. They need punishments that deter wrongdoing without destroying community cooperation. The earliest legal systems focus on maintaining order and protecting property. Laws against theft, assault, and murder. Rules about trade relationships and debt obligations. Procedures for resolving disputes between individuals and communities. These legal innovations make it possible for strangers to interact peacefully and predictably. But law also reinforces social hierarchies. Crimes against elite people carry harsher punishments than the same crimes against ordinary people. Elite individuals have access to better legal representation and more favourable court procedures. The legal system protects the privileges of the wealthy and powerful. Military organisation is becoming more sophisticated too. Chiefs command larger forces than any previous human societies. They need officers who can lead subdivisions of the army. They need supply systems that can feed and equip soldiers during extended campaigns. They need strategies for coordinating attacks and defences. Warfare is changing from raids between small groups to organised conflicts between entire societies. Armies of thousands of soldiers fight battles that determine control over vast territories and resources. Military success can transform small chiefdoms into regional powers almost overnight. The weapons and tactics are evolving rapidly. Bronze weapons give decisive advantages over armies using stone tools. Organised formations of spearmen can defeat larger numbers of individual fighters. Archers and slingers provide long-range support for infantry attacks. Military innovation is becoming crucial for political survival. Trade relationships are becoming more complex and politically important. Chiefs control access to luxury goods that demonstrate elite status. They manage relationships with distant communities that provide essential resources. They use trade to build alliances and gain intelligence about potential enemies. Some communities are becoming entirely dependent on trade relationships managed by their chiefs. They specialize in producing particular goods for export while importing food and other necessities. This specialization makes them more prosperous, but also more vulnerable to political and economic disruption. Regional integration is accelerating. Chiefs are forming alliances with neighbouring communities to increase their power and security. Some are conquering weaker neighbours and incorporating them into larger political units. The largest chiefdoms now control territories with tens of thousands of inhabitants. This integration is creating the first multi-ethnic societies. People from different cultural backgrounds are being brought together under unified political control. They're learning to cooperate despite speaking different languages and following different traditions. They're developing shared institutions that bridge cultural differences. But integration also creates new tensions and conflicts. Different groups compete for resources and political influence within the larger society. Cultural differences can be sources of misunderstanding and conflict. Chiefs have to balance the interests of different communities while maintaining overall unity and order. Social mobility is becoming more limited as hierarchies solidify. Elite families are passing their advantages to their children through inheritance of property, political positions, and social connections. It's becoming harder for people from ordinary backgrounds to rise to positions of power and influence. Education and training are increasingly important for maintaining elite status. The children of chiefs and specialists receive instruction in reading, writing, religious knowledge, and administrative skills. They're prepared from early ages to take over their parents' roles in society. Meanwhile, the children of farmers and labourers have fewer opportunities for advanced education or specialised training. They're more likely to spend their lives doing the same kinds of work their parents did. Social class is becoming more hereditary and less based on individual achievement. Your ancestor's world has been transformed beyond recognition from the simple farming villages her grandparents knew. She's living in a complex society with thousands of inhabitants, sophisticated technology, monumental architecture, and centralized government. The foundations of civilization are being laid, but the transformation isn't finished. These early chiefdoms are about to give rise to something even more revolutionary. True cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants, complex governments, written laws, and specialized institutions that will define human civilization for thousands of years to come. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. In the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, a revolutionary idea was taking shape, one that would create the first true cities and change the meaning of human existence forever. Your ancestor walks through streets unlike anything any human has ever seen before. It's 5,500 years ago, and she's entering Uruk, the world's first true city. The walls stretch higher than she can see. Buildings rise 3 and 4 stories into the sky. The streets bustle with more people than live in her entire homeland. She's travelled here from a farming village hundreds of miles away, carrying goods to trade in the city's markets, but nothing prepared her for this. Uruk has 50,000 people living permanently within its walls, more humans than have ever lived together in one place in the history of the world. The city sits in the fertile valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what we now call Iraq. This land, Mesopotamia, is perfect for the world's first urban experiment. The rivers flood every spring, depositing rich soil across vast plains. The climate is warm enough for year-round agriculture, and most importantly, the floods are predictable and manageable. But turning this swampland into farmland that can support 50,000 people required the most ambitious engineering project humans had ever attempted. Your ancestor can see the results stretching to the horizon. A network of canals, dikes, and irrigation channels that brings river water to millions of acres of farmland. These irrigation systems didn't appear overnight. They're the result of centuries of coordinated effort by thousands of workers. Teams of labourers dug the main canals that carry water from the rivers. Engineers designed the complex systems of gates and channels that distribute water to individual fields. Administrators organize the work schedules that ensure fair water distribution among competing communities. The scale of organization required for this irrigation network far exceeds anything the chiefdoms achieved. Hundreds of villages had to cooperate in building and maintaining the canals. Someone had to coordinate planting schedules so water would be available when each community needed it. Disputes over water rights had to be resolved fairly or the entire system would collapse. The solution was centralized government more powerful than any that had existed before. The rulers of Uruk don't just control the city, they govern the entire irrigation network and all the communities that depend on it. They command the labor of hundreds of thousands of people across thousands of square miles of territory. This intensive agriculture produces food surpluses beyond anything previous societies achieved. The irrigated fields around Uruk produce enough grain to feed not just the farmers who work them, but also the 50,000 city residents who spend their time on other activities. For the first time in human history, the majority of people in a society don't have to spend their days producing food. Your ancestor stares in amazement at what these non-farming city dwellers have created. Master craftspeople produce goods of incredible sophistication. Potter's wheels spin out perfectly symmetrical vessels. Metalworkers create bronze tools and weapons of unprecedented sharpness and durability. Weavers produce textiles so fine they feel like liquid silk. The city has professional soldiers who train for warfare full-time, instead of just fighting when their communities are threatened. They carry bronze weapons and wear armor that makes them nearly invincible against enemies using stone tools. They march in coordinated formations and follow complex battle strategies that smaller societies could never organize. Religious specialists conduct elaborate ceremonies in temples that dwarf any previous religious buildings. The main temple complex in Uruk covers several acres and includes multiple buildings, courtyards, and ceremonial areas. Hundreds of priests and priestesses work full-time maintaining the religious life of the city and surrounding region. Administrators keep detailed records of everything from tax collections to trade agreements to legal judgments. They coordinate the complex logistics of feeding and governing 50,000 people. They manage relationships with other cities and organize the defense of the entire territory. The city has professional merchants who organize trade networks spanning the known world. They bring in raw materials that aren't available locally, metals from distant mountains, precious stones from far-off deserts, luxury goods from exotic foreign lands. They export the city's manufactured products to communities across the region. But the most revolutionary aspect of Uruk isn't any particular profession or building. It's the urban planning that makes such a large population possible. The city is laid out in organized districts with specialized functions, residential areas where people live, industrial zones where craftspeople work, commercial districts where merchants conduct business, religious quarters centered around major temples. The residential areas are divided by social class in ways that would have been impossible in smaller communities. Elite families live in large houses with private courtyards, multiple rooms and elaborate decorations. Ordinary citizens live in smaller but still substantial homes with basic amenities. Workers and servants live in simple quarters, sometimes shared with multiple families. The city has public infrastructure that serves the entire population. Wells that provide clean drinking water, public baths where people can wash and socialize, granaries where surplus food is stored safely, markets where goods from across the region are available for purchase. Waste management has become a major challenge requiring systematic solutions. With 50,000 people producing garbage and human waste every day, the city would quickly become uninhabitable without organized disposal systems. Work crews collect waste regularly and transport it outside the city walls. Drainage systems carry away rainwater and prevent flooding. The streets are laid out in planned patterns rather than growing randomly like village paths. Major thoroughfares connect different districts and provide access to important buildings. Smaller streets branch off from the main roads to serve residential areas. The street system makes it possible for people and goods to move efficiently throughout the city. Security requires much more organization than village defense ever did. The city walls are massive fortifications that require thousands of workers to build and maintain. Guard towers provide lookout points for spotting approaching enemies. Gates control access to the city and can be sealed quickly if threats appear. Inside the walls, maintaining order among 50,000 people requires professional law enforcement. City guards patrol the streets and respond to crimes and disputes. Courts hear cases and render judgments according to established legal codes. Jails hold criminals awaiting trial or serving sentences. The economy has become incredibly complex. Instead of the simple bartering that characterizes smaller communities, Uruk has developed sophisticated systems of credit, debt, and standardized exchange rates. Professional money changers facilitate transactions between people using different types of currency. Specialized markets serve different types of commerce. Wholesale markets where merchants trade in bulk quantities. Retail markets where ordinary citizens buy daily necessities. Luxury markets where wealthy customers purchase expensive imported goods. Craft markets where artisans sell their specialized products directly to consumers. The labor force is organized with unprecedented specialization. Master craftspeople who have spent decades perfecting their skills. Journeymen who have learned the basics of their trades but are still developing expertise. Apprentices who are just beginning to learn specialized crafts. Unskilled laborers who perform basic physical work. Social mobility exists but is becoming more limited as the city matures. Talented individuals can still rise through exceptional skill or fortune, but it's becoming harder as elite families consolidate their advantages. Wealthy parents can afford better education and training for their children. They can provide startup capital for new businesses. They have social connections that open doors to opportunities. The city's influence extends far beyond its walls. Uruk controls dozens of smaller towns and hundreds of villages throughout the irrigation system. Local leaders acknowledge the city's authority. Regional disputes are resolved by Uruk's courts. Military campaigns are organized from the city to protect the entire territory. Other cities are beginning to emerge throughout Mesopotamia using Uruk as a model. Ur, Babylon, and dozens of other urban centers are growing rapidly. Each controls its own territory and irrigation system. Each develops its own specialties and trade relationships. These city-states sometimes cooperate and sometimes compete with each other. They form alliances for mutual defense against outside threats. They establish trade agreements that benefit both partners. But they also fight wars over water rights, territory, and trade routes. The competition between cities is driving rapid innovation and development. Each city tries to outdo its rivals in military technology, architectural achievements, and commercial success. New techniques and innovations spread quickly as cities copy each other's successes and try to improve on them. Your ancestor realizes she's witnessing something completely unprecedented in human history. Never before have so many people lived so closely together. Never before has human society been organized on such a large scale. Never before have people been able to specialize so completely in activities beyond basic survival. The implications are staggering. If 50,000 people can live together successfully in Uruk, how many might eventually live in a single city? If Mesopotamia can support multiple cities, how many urban centers might eventually exist in the world? If irrigation agriculture can transform swampland into productive farmland, what other environments might humans eventually master? The city is also creating new types of human problems and opportunities. Crime exists on a scale unknown in smaller communities. Disease can spread rapidly through dense populations. Social conflicts can involve thousands of people. But cities also create possibilities for human achievement that were impossible in smaller societies. Art and architecture can reach new levels of sophistication when master craftspeople work full-time on creative projects. Knowledge can accumulate faster when specialists focus entirely on learning and discovery. Technology can advance more rapidly when inventors have access to materials and techniques from across the known world. The Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia are conducting humanity's first experiment with urban civilization. They're solving problems that no previous society ever faced. They're creating institutions and techniques that will influence human development for thousands of years. Your ancestor doesn't know it, but the city she's visiting will inspire similar experiments across the world. The urban model pioneered in Mesopotamia will spread to Egypt, India, China, and eventually to every continent. The age of cities has begun, and with it, the age of complex civilization. But first, these early cities need to solve one crucial problem: how to preserve and transmit the vast amounts of information required to coordinate such complex societies. The solution they develop will be one of humanity's greatest inventions. Your ancestor watches the scribe make marks on a clay tablet with a reed stylus. It's 5,200 years ago in Uruk, and she's witnessing the birth of humanity's greatest information revolution. The marks don't look like pictures of the things they represent. They're abstract symbols that somehow capture human thoughts and preserve them permanently. The scribe is recording a complex business transaction. Your ancestor is trading barley from her village for manufactured goods from the city. The quantities are large, the quality specifications are detailed, and the delivery schedule spans several months. Without written records, such a complicated agreement would be impossible to manage. This writing system didn't appear overnight. It evolved gradually from simple accounting methods that merchants developed to track their increasingly complex trade relationships. The story of writing begins with small clay tokens that represent different goods: a cone-shaped token for a measure of grain, a sphere for a sheep, a cylinder for a container of oil. For centuries, merchants used these tokens to record transactions. If someone owed you 10 sheep and 5 measures of grain, you would keep tokens representing those quantities until the debt was paid. The tokens were often sealed inside clay envelopes to prevent tampering and disputes. But as trade became more complex, the token system became unwieldy. Merchants were dealing with hundreds of different products in varying quantities. They needed to record not just what was owed, but when it was due, what quality was expected, and who was responsible for delivery. The token system couldn't handle this level of detail. The breakthrough came when someone realized they could draw pictures of the tokens on the outside of clay envelopes instead of putting actual tokens inside. These pictures conveyed the same information as the physical tokens, but were much more efficient. Soon, people were abandoning the tokens entirely and just drawing the symbols. The symbols evolved rapidly as scribes looked for ways to write faster and more clearly. Pictures of sheep became simplified marks that were easier to draw quickly. Complex drawings were reduced to a few essential lines. The reed styluses that scribes used naturally created wedge-shaped marks in the clay, so the symbols adapted to this triangular style. Within a few centuries, the system had evolved from realistic pictures to abstract symbols that bore no resemblance to the things they represented. This transformation was crucial because it allowed writing to represent not just physical objects, but abstract concepts. Symbols could represent ideas, actions, and relationships that couldn't be drawn as pictures. The scribes also discovered they could represent the sounds of spoken language, not just the meanings of words. A symbol that originally meant water could also be used to represent the sound wa in any word that contained that sound. This phonetic principle allowed writing to capture the full complexity of human speech. Your ancestor doesn't understand these technical details, but she can see the results. The scribe's tablet contains far more information than she could possibly remember accurately. The delivery dates, quality specifications, penalty clauses, and backup arrangements are all preserved exactly as agreed. Neither party can later claim the agreement was different from what's written. Writing is transforming how business gets conducted throughout Mesopotamia. Merchants can maintain accurate records of debts and credits. They can write contracts that specify exactly what each party must do. They can send detailed instructions to agents in distant cities. Commerce becomes much more reliable and sophisticated. But writing's impact goes far beyond business applications. Temple administrators use it to track religious offerings, ceremonial schedules, and priestly duties. Government officials record tax collections, legal judgments, and military campaigns. Property owners document land ownership, inheritance rights, and boundary disputes. The most revolutionary development is the emergence of literature. Scribes begin recording not just practical information, but stories, poems, and religious texts that preserve cultural knowledge for future generations. The Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's first great literary work, captures the adventures of a legendary king and explores themes of friendship, mortality, and human purpose. These literary works serve crucial social functions. They preserve historical memories that might otherwise be forgotten. They transmit moral lessons and cultural values to new generations. They provide entertainment and artistic satisfaction to people throughout society. Writing makes culture cumulative in ways that were impossible when knowledge could only be passed down through oral tradition. Legal systems become much more sophisticated with written law codes. The famous Code of Hammurabi, carved on stone pillars and displayed publicly, contains nearly 300 laws covering everything from property rights to family relationships to commercial transactions. Having written laws means everyone can know exactly what behaviors are prohibited and what punishments will be imposed. Written laws also make justice more consistent. Judges can refer to established precedents rather than relying on personal judgment or local customs. Similar cases receive similar punishments regardless of which judge hears them. Legal procedures become standardized across entire kingdoms. Education emerges as a specialized profession to teach literacy skills. Scribal schools train young people in the complex art of reading and writing. Students spend years learning to recognize thousands of different symbols, understand grammatical rules, and master the various styles of writing used for different purposes. These schools become centers of learning that go far beyond just literacy training. Students study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields of knowledge. They learn to conduct research by consulting written sources. They develop the intellectual skills needed for administration, religious leadership, and other elite occupations. But literacy remains a privilege of the wealthy elite. Learning to read and write takes years of intensive study that most families can't afford. Scribes become a powerful professional class because their skills are essential for government administration, business operations, and religious activities. The gap between literate and illiterate people creates new forms of social inequality. Those who can read have access to accumulated knowledge that illiterate people lack. They can participate in complex legal and commercial transactions. They can qualify for administrative positions that offer influence and wealth. Writing also changes how people think about knowledge and truth. When information is preserved in writing, it becomes possible to compare different versions of the same story and notice inconsistencies. Written records can be checked for accuracy and completeness. Knowledge becomes more systematic and organized. Libraries begin to appear as collections of written works are gathered and preserved. The library at Alexandria in Egypt will eventually contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls covering every field of human knowledge. Scholars can research questions by consulting multiple written sources instead of relying only on what they personally know or can learn from oral sources. Scientific and technical knowledge advances more rapidly when it can be recorded in writing. Medical treatments that prove effective can be documented and shared with other healers. Engineering techniques that work well can be preserved and transmitted to future builders. Agricultural innovations can be recorded and spread to other farming regions. Written communication allows coordination of activities across vast distances. Kings can send detailed orders to governors in distant provinces. Military commanders can communicate complex battle plans to their subordinates. Merchants can coordinate commercial activities with partners they never meet in person. The writing system spreads rapidly throughout Mesopotamia and beyond as people recognize its enormous advantages. Different regions adapt the system to their own languages and needs. The symbols and techniques evolve to serve new purposes and express new ideas. But writing also creates new vulnerabilities. Important information becomes concentrated in written records that can be destroyed by fire, flood, or warfare. Societies become dependent on literate specialists whose skills are essential for basic social functions. The complexity of written information requires new institutions and procedures to manage it effectively. Administrative bureaucracies emerge to handle the growing volume of written records. Professional administrators specialize in managing government documents. Archivists develop techniques for storing and retrieving important records. Copyists preserve essential documents by making duplicate copies. Your ancestor realizes she's witnessing something that will change human society forever. The ability to preserve information permanently and transmit it accurately across time and distance gives humans capabilities they never had before. Knowledge can accumulate across generations instead of being lost when individuals die. The implications are staggering. If humans can write down their discoveries and inventions, how much knowledge might eventually be accumulated? If information can be shared instantly across vast distances, how might this change politics, commerce, and warfare? If future generations can learn from written records of the past, how much faster might human progress accelerate? Writing is humanity's first technology for conquering time. It allows people who lived thousands of years apart to communicate directly. It makes possible the preservation and transmission of complex knowledge that no individual could master alone. It creates the foundation for all future scientific, technological, and cultural achievements. The literate civilizations of Mesopotamia are gaining decisive advantages over societies that still rely entirely on oral tradition. They can coordinate more complex activities, preserve more sophisticated knowledge, and adapt more quickly to new challenges and opportunities. But Mesopotamia isn't the only region where urban civilization is emerging. Across the world, other societies are independently developing their own solutions to the challenges of organizing large, complex communities. Each will create its own distinctive approach to the problems and possibilities of civilized life. Your ancestor steps off the boat onto the carefully planned docks of Harappa. It's 4,500 years ago, and she's entered a city that rivals anything in Mesopotamia, but looks completely different. The streets are laid out in perfect grids. Every house has running water and sewage connections. The city planning is more advanced than anything she's seen before. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, stretching across what we now call Pakistan and northwest India. Like Mesopotamia, it's built around river systems that provide water for intensive agriculture. But the people here have taken urban planning to unprecedented levels of sophistication. Harappa has 50,000 residents, just like Uruk. But where Mesopotamian cities grew organically around ancient temples and markets, Indus Valley cities were designed from the beginning as integrated urban systems. Every street is exactly the same width. Every block follows the same dimensions. Every house is built to standardized specifications. The water and sanitation systems are revolutionary. Every house has its own well for fresh water. Every house has a private bathroom with a toilet connected to covered sewage drains. The sewage system carries waste away from residential areas to disposal sites outside the city walls. No other civilization has achieved this level of public health infrastructure. The city has public baths that serve the entire community. The Great Bath in Mohenjo-Daro is a marvel of engineering. A waterproof pool lined with perfectly fitted bricks, surrounded by changing rooms and galleries. The water is heated and filtered through sophisticated systems that ensure cleanliness and comfort. But the most remarkable feature of Indus Valley civilization is its apparent equality. Unlike Mesopotamian cities with their obvious class distinctions, Indus Valley houses are remarkably similar in size and quality. There are no palaces for kings or massive temples for gods. The society seems to be organized along more egalitarian principles. The people have developed their own writing system, but it's completely different from Mesopotamian cuneiform. The symbols appear on seals, pottery, and metal objects throughout the region. Unfortunately, modern scholars haven't yet deciphered the script, so we don't know what these ancient texts say. Trade networks connect Indus Valley cities with Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and regions as far away as Afghanistan and Gujarat. Standardized weights and measures are used throughout the civilization, making commerce efficient and reliable. The cities produce cotton textiles, bronze goods, and jewelry that are traded across the ancient world. Meanwhile, along the Nile River in Egypt, another urban civilization is emerging with its own distinctive characteristics. The geography here shapes everything about Egyptian development. The Nile floods predictably every year, depositing fertile soil along its banks. But the river valley is narrow, creating a long, thin strip of farmland surrounded by desert. This geography leads to political unification much earlier than in Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley. Around 5,000 years ago, the entire Nile Valley comes under the control of a single ruler called the Pharaoh. This unified kingdom can coordinate massive projects that smaller city-states could never attempt. The Egyptians are building the first monumental stone architecture in human history. The pyramids at Giza require coordination of tens of thousands of workers over decades of construction. Moving the massive stone blocks requires engineering techniques that push the limits of Bronze Age technology. These projects aren't just impressive construction achievements. They're demonstrations of the pharaoh's power to mobilize the entire population for shared goals. They create symbols of Egyptian achievement that will inspire awe for thousands of years. They develop engineering and organizational capabilities that serve practical as well as symbolic purposes. Egyptian writing, called hieroglyphics, combines pictorial symbols with phonetic elements like Mesopotamian cuneiform, but develops along completely independent lines. Egyptian scribes write on papyrus, a paper-like material made from plants that grow along the Nile. This writing material is lighter and more portable than clay tablets. The Egyptians are also developing sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge. They create a calendar based on careful observation of stellar movements. They develop geometric techniques for surveying land and designing buildings. Their mathematical knowledge enables the precision engineering required for pyramid construction. Egyptian society is more centralized than other early civilizations. The pharaoh is believed to be a god who owns the entire kingdom. All land belongs ultimately to him. All major decisions require his approval. This extreme centralization allows coordination of massive projects, but also makes the society vulnerable to disruption if central authority breaks down. Far to the east, along the Yellow River in China, a third major civilization is developing its own solutions to the challenges of urban life. Chinese cities begin appearing around 4,000 years ago, later than in other regions, but with innovations that will prove enormously influential. Chinese civilization develops around different crops than other regions. Rice cultivation in the south and millet farming in the north provide the agricultural foundation. The techniques for growing these crops require different social organization than wheat farming in Mesopotamia or the mixed agriculture of the Indus Valley. Chinese writing systems evolve independently from all other regions. The characters represent meanings rather than sounds, making Chinese writing more pictographic than alphabetic systems. This approach allows the writing system to serve many different spoken languages within Chinese civilization. The Chinese develop distinctive approaches to government and social organization. The concept of the mandate of heaven justifies political authority based on moral virtue rather than just military power or religious authority. Rulers maintain legitimacy by governing wisely and ethically. This creates expectations for government performance that influence Chinese politics for thousands of years. Chinese cities are often built around ceremonial complexes rather than commercial centers like Mesopotamian cities or administrative centers like Egyptian cities. Religious and philosophical traditions develop that emphasize harmony between human society and natural systems. Technology develops differently in each civilization based on available resources and cultural preferences. Mesopotamians become master metalworkers and develop wheeled vehicles. Egyptians excel at stone construction and develop sophisticated medical knowledge. Chinese inventors create silk textiles, fine porcelain, and eventually paper and printing. But these civilizations don't develop in isolation. Trade networks connect all the major regions by 4,000 years ago. Goods, ideas, and techniques spread along these routes, creating cross-cultural influences that accelerate development everywhere. Mesopotamian bronze-working techniques reach the Indus Valley and China. Egyptian mathematics influences Greek scholars, who will later influence Islamic and European learning. Chinese inventions like the compass and printing will eventually revolutionize navigation and communication worldwide. Each civilization also faces similar challenges despite their different solutions. All struggle with the tensions between individual freedom and collective organization that complex society creates. All develop legal systems to resolve conflicts between people who don't know each other personally. All create educational systems to train people for specialized roles. Disease becomes a major challenge for all dense urban populations. When thousands of people live closely together, infectious diseases can spread rapidly and devastate entire cities. Each civilization develops its own medical knowledge and public health practices to address these challenges. Environmental management becomes crucial as populations grow and place increasing pressure on natural resources. Deforestation, soil exhaustion, and water pollution threaten the agricultural base that supports urban populations. Long-term sustainability requires careful management of natural systems. Military competition intensifies as civilizations come into contact with each other. Each region develops its own military technologies and strategies. Bronze weapons, horse-drawn chariots, and organized armies give civilized societies decisive advantages over less organized peoples. But military success creates new challenges. Conquered territories must be governed. Diverse populations must be integrated into unified political systems. The costs of maintaining large armies and defensive fortifications consume enormous resources. By 4,000 years ago, urban civilizations are established on 3 continents. Each has developed its own distinctive culture, but all share certain characteristics. Intensive agriculture, dense populations, specialized occupations, monumental architecture, writing systems, organized governments, and complex trade networks. These civilizations are creating the foundation for everything that comes next in human development. The political institutions, legal traditions, technological innovations, and cultural achievements they develop will influence human society for thousands of years. Your ancestor realizes she's living through the most dramatic transformation in human history. In just a few thousand years, humans have gone from small bands of hunter-gatherers to complex urban civilizations with tens of thousands of inhabitants. The pace of change is accelerating beyond anything previous generations ever experienced. But this is still just the beginning. These early civilizations will continue to grow and develop. They'll create empires that span continents. They'll develop technologies that seem magical to earlier generations. They'll accumulate knowledge and cultural achievements that dwarf anything yet accomplished. The foundation has been laid. The experiments in complex social organization have proven successful. Urban civilization isn't just possible, it's becoming the dominant form of human society. The future will belong to societies that can master the challenges and opportunities of civilized life. By 3000 BCE, the impossible had become inevitable. Across the globe, in valleys and river deltas, the first great civilizations were rising. But the greatest achievements and the greatest challenges lay just ahead. By 4,500 years ago, your ancestors had achieved the impossible. Look at what they'd created from nothing. Where endless wilderness once stretched empty across the earth, magnificent cities now rose from river valleys. Uruk's walls protected 50,000 people living together in harmony. The pyramids of Egypt pierced the clouds like stone mountains built by human hands. Ziggurats in Babylon reached toward the heavens themselves. Your ancestors had conquered time itself. Clay tablets preserved their thoughts forever. The Epic of Gilgamesh would outlive its author by thousands of years. Mathematical formulas discovered in one generation could teach the next. Knowledge no longer died with the people who discovered it. They had conquered space too. Trade ships connected civilizations across oceans. Merchants in China traded silk for silver mined in distant mountains. Ideas travelled faster than armies. A technique invented in Egypt could appear in India within months. Most incredible of all, they had conquered chaos. Laws written in stone replaced the uncertainty of personal conflicts. Courts settled disputes fairly. Kings coordinated the work of millions. From the scattered, struggling bands of the Ice Age, humanity had built something magnificent and enduring. The foundation was complete. Everything that would come next, Rome, the Renaissance, the modern world, all of it started here. As sleep takes you tonight, remember this truth. You are the heir to the greatest transformation in Earth's history. Every street you walk was inspired by those first Mesopotamian roads. Every book you read exists because scribes in Uruk first pressed symbols into clay. Every law that protects you traces back to those ancient legal codes carved in stone. Your ancestors chose the harder path. They could have kept wandering forever, staying safe in the old ways. Instead, they planted seeds and built cities. They took risks and created wonders. Their dreams live in you. Rest well, knowing you carry civilization itself in your heart.